Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newest episode of our new podcast, Laser Brains. I am your co-host, Mike L., and as always, I'm joined by
Joshua Marvell. And as always, we have my decoy here.
Kira Knightley, thank you.
Yes, Kira Knightley is joining us. Kira, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Just watched the Phantom Menace. I couldn't be happier.
And okay, Kira, can you tell us who our guest is on our first episode?
On our very first episode, we have a very special guest. This is Nick. Nick has been here at Meteor Movie Nights
Uniplex
fairly regularly for quite a while now, and one of the only people that actually made it to Phantom Menace.
Everyone liked the photo. They liked the post. They did a lot of things. They didn't come. That's okay.
Insisted we make it public so it's shareable.
Yes.
There must have been some sort of blockade or something.
Okay. We just watched, for our inaugural episode of Laser Brains, we're going to review the Phantom Menace, but I got to point out, this is the first time in history there's ever been a prequel podcast. This podcast is not a spin-off of Tape Crusaders. It's a prequel. Okay?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So you have to watch this
after.
podcast before you watch any episodes of Tape Crusaders.
Is this why nobody watches Tape Crusaders?
Yes, it is. Okay, so here's the thing. There's so many things we could say about this movie. There's so many things we've all said before in other episodes of Comic Book Syndicate. But let's just briefly tell the audience how many times, we're going to go in order of age, how many times have we seen this movie before tonight? I stopped keeping track at 9. And I'm probably at 50. Ian, how many times?
50,
how many times?
50 times?
Yes, 50 times. How many times have you seen this movie?
I'm going to say maybe 5 times.
5. Okay.
That
Josh,
sounds like a lot to me.
It's not a lot to me, but Josh, how many times have you seen this movie?
I've seen it so many times, I've felt like I've lived it.
Okay. okay.
But
Nick,
honestly, countless.
countless, infinite, like me. Okay.
He's actually watching it right now.
Yeah.
He's replaying it in his brain.
Nick, how many times have you seen this movie?
0.
Well,
Until
tonight.
Right.
Until tonight. Your perfect guess. You've never seen the movie. Okay, so here's the thing. We have a lot to say about this movie, but I'm actually more interested in what you have to say because tonight's your first time ever seeing it. So tell us, give us your brief first impression of the Phantom Menace.
From the first 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I totally get that in 1993 people are going to leave this thing going, what?
99.
99. Yeah. And I'm like, what would Trade Federation?
Right.
It's been over 20. Oh my God. See, I'm sitting there just in awe. The first act I found was just it was shit happening in the movie. It was amazing. Now that second act, I'm like, not so much. Then third for me kind of brought it all together. But within the first couple minutes, I'm like, oh my God, I can't be anything but locked in.
Okay. There's so many things I could say. I'm going to try and say things I've never said before. But Ian, I've said this to you before. It takes 9 times to really get into this movie. Okay, I saw it 3 times in the theater, and I hated it every time. Yeah. But I still bought it on VHS, and I still watched it. But after the 9th time, I was lost. I was like,
sorry,
now I get it.
My tendrils keep hitting the microphone.
Yeah. But after the 9th time, I'm like, I get it. I get it now. I get the speed of the story, the action, the love for Flash Gordon, which we're familiar with. And so even though I don't think it's a great movie, I think it's a great kids movie, and I do love it.
I was actually going to say that was the vibe that I was getting. This was meant to have kids in the theater and they would be entertained because, we'll probably get into how the second act I don't think really follows under that. But it felt like there was always stuff going on besides that, and it was geared to that. And if I recall, because I have friends that are much bigger Star Wars fans than I, that seemed like that was kind of George's idea from the get-go, was to have that kind of pulpy atmosphere for that.
George wants to sell toys.
Yes.
Who do you sell toys to? Kids.
And what did I think when I was watching this? Oh my God, that's going to be a cool toy.
Yes.
That's going to be a really cool toy. Kids are really going to want to have the pod racer at home.
By the way, I noticed you stopped yourself. You can swear on this podcast. I don't know if you...
Thank fucking God.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Lucas, Oh boy! I mean, what can you say about the guy? Not a great director. Definitely not a good writer.
No.
Genius businessman.
Yeah.
Transformed the industry. Everyone knows this. We don't need to talk about it. We're just going to talk about this movie. And I've said many times on this show and other forums that it was the biggest disappointment of my life on opening night when I saw it. But I've come around a little bit. But Josh, I want to ask you, this came out before you were born?
No, I was 4 when this came out.
Okay.
So
what's your impression?
I loved it ever since I was a kid.
Okay.
And I didn't see this in theaters. But I grew up watching the VHS tapes at home. And then this was like one of the first DVDs I think I owned. And I loved it. I watched this over and over again. And honestly, maybe more than this movie, I feel like I've watched the DVD bonus features for this.
Me too.
Like an obscene amount of times.
Right, me too.
Like I just love... I really love everything around this movie, and I know it's not great, but like as a kid, I loved this movie. And then the behind the scenes and the making of it, and the visual effects developed for this movie, like it holds such a special place in my heart. And even with all of like the awful like blue screens that were kind of developed, this one has the most of all 3 practical effects. You can really feel that in this movie at times, like down to the lightsabers having still like unique kind of qualities and like real world objects built into the lightsabers, down to like the women's like razors used to build like the underwater breathing things that they used to like. It's just like everything. Like, you know, it's just a great, I feel like, mashup of
it's almost
those
like
2 worlds.
Yeah, it's almost like a Roger Corman or old Star Trek vibe where you're just taking household items and you know, turning them around and turning them into something.
Painted silver, and now it's a space
now it's a space thing. But Ian, I want to know, what do you think? Talk to us about the Phantom Menace.
All right. Well, I saw this film in theaters when it came out. Only one time.
Not 3?
Not 3.
Okay.
This came on the heels of the Star Wars special editions, and I had never seen a Star Wars film in theaters before until they came out, the re-releases leading up to the Phantom Menace.
You know, it's funny. I've never seen a Star Wars movie. I'm a really big Phantom Menace fan.
So there was palpable excitement when this movie was coming out because everyone was being reintroduced to Star Wars again. And seeing it on the big screen and knowing there's another movie coming out, holy shit, this is going to be the most incredible thing ever. And I remember sitting in the theater, and long time ago pops up, and I'm like, my God, this is a new movie that I'm seeing with this title crawl.
Yes,
and
the thrill.
The John Williams musical score and the Star Wars logo zooming in, and it just gave me goosebumps. Like, it's kind of giving me goosebumps now, just sort of reminiscing about how I felt at the time. And it resulted in this weird feeling after the film was done that I tried to convince myself that I liked it in order to justify how excited I was for it walking in.
Like you're trying to gaslight your own enjoyment of it.
That's exactly what I was doing. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, that was great. That was great. Except I didn't know what the fuck had happened. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand half of the dialogue. I didn't understand the motivations of the characters. I didn't know what this trade federation was doing. I didn't know why Naboo was being blockaded. I didn't know why I'm supposed to care about any of this. And it was just this clusterfuck of stuff that didn't really make a lot of sense. Like I could understand what was happening, but I couldn't understand why it was happening. And I didn't understand why I was supposed to care about it.
But the metachlorians were pretty cool, though.
Oh, boy.
Oh, they were so cool.
Here's the thing. The climax of the film was this.
Yeah.
And and then the Star Wars, and then as soon as it said taxation in the opening crawl,
oh my God, the most
then
boring.
the movie began to go down, and then I could go frame by frame, like.
And the very first line of dialogue is like,
"Yes, sir."
But it's like one of the laziest writing tropes. Oh, as you know already, this blockade is perfectly legal. Like, oh, you're laying an as you know.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Seconds of the film.
But I'll even back up to even further because Star Wars, the original, opens with the giant ship flying over the camera. Iconic, right? Empire opens with... I don't remember how Empire opens.
Is it the droids that are...
No, it's in space, but it's funny. It's one of my favorite movies. I don't remember how it opens. But all Star Wars movies have an iconic opening. This one opens with this little tiny spaceship that looks like something out of, Star Trek, which is fine. I love Star Trek. But when I see Star Wars, I want to see a big Star Destroyer type ship, right?
Interesting.
That was my impression.
Sets the tone for that spectacle for the rest of it.
Yeah, and then you have this tiny ship, and then you have the... Yes, sir. The bad acting. Then you have right away. You have these. You have. Oh my God. The what are they? The Gungans or whatever.
The Gungans.
The characters with the bad Asian accents.
The Nemoidians.
Oh, the Nemoidians.
I was going to say wrong potential racial stereotype.
Yeah.
Of which there are many.
So many.
Yeah,
of them.
there's
I think those two that are guarding the Viceroy, those are almost a twofer because I'm like, are these I'm trying to pin which culture this could be an on.
Right.
And I'm like, there's a lot of candidates. George, I take my hat off to you. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I'll make it really clear on the record. I do not take my hat off to George for that.
But it's bizarre because they have an Asian accent and they have mouths that don't quite match. So, but the thing is, and I want to defend Lucas. He's not doing racial stereotypes. He's doing he's doing an imitation of a Hollywood racial stereotype, which is slightly...
It's another level of abstraction on top of...
Right.
It's like it rhymes. It's like a tone poem. It rhymes.
Are you saying it's like a haiku?
Yeah, something like that.
It's like poetry.
Oh boy. We all have a million things to say. Okay, so Nick, you're watching this movie. It's got 25 years of legacy built up.
Yes. And what's interesting, it's funny because for friends of mine that are massive Star Wars fans, when they were not, I say selling, I say more like warning. They were saying, well, again, trade federation, taxation, all about that. Now I'm speaking as a political science major. I'm like, awesome, great, can't wait. And there were so many times during the movie where I found, not to be facetious, that was the most interesting part, where I'm like, can we go back to that? Because when it was stuff like, okay, the underwater stuff that we're seeing when we're with Jar Jar and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, we're going through, and I'm like, okay, kind of cool that we have these big sea monsters that are trying to eat it, but there's no consequence. It's just because George is like,
Great
it
point.
would be really cool. It's so...
There's always a bigger fish.
exactly.
It's a hat on a hat.
It's because it's like, what if I wanted to hear that cliche line in an Irish accent? Kind of, sort of. Is it an Irish accent? I'm not sure.
Sure, and not only like two in a row that are the same.
Yeah.
Small fish,
It's
big
the
fish,
same-
small fish.
yeah.
It's the same freaking bit. And what makes it even worse is that, like you said, they're never in any danger.
No.
Jar Jar is freaking out. Obi-Wan's in the middle, and Qui-Gon's sitting back there, just like, "Don't worry, we're not in any danger." Well, if you're not in any danger, then why do I care? Why am I watching this?
What are the stakes of this?
Right,
You can have 100 goober fish.
right.
But there's always going to be a bigger one that's
You
going
only
to
need one to make a
bite
good
the one that's
scene,
biting you.
right? Like in the A New Hope, they're trapped in that garbage thing,
Right.
and that one little one-eyed creature comes up. That's all you need. It's not the spectacle, it's not the size, it's a threat in the stakes, right? But it's like Lucas, I've said before, he had so much help on the original films with co-writers and with Gary Kurtz producing, and with all these, like even Harrison Ford saying, you can write the shit, but you can't say it. And this film, the impression is he had all these yes men. And this is pure Lucas. This is bad dialogue. This is confusing plots and confusing concepts. Like you're sitting there going, okay, this is a kid's movie. It's about taxation. But like you said, Ian, they're saying dialogue, and you're like, what did they say?
Yeah, if you can't understand it, that's bad enough. But even when you can understand it, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like every time I watch it, there's still like a new piece of dialogue where I'm going, oh, okay, that's what that guy says. Or,
Yes.
oh, that's what's going on here
I
at this
wasn't
moment.
sure if it was like the mixing, or I'm like, is my hearing going? Like,
Yeah.
I was noticing that as well too.
It's a combination of delivery, mixing, editing. Like the characters say lines, but they're rushed and they're off camera and they're just badly everything, right?
And every line is delivered the exact same way. It has the exact same weight
Intonation,
to it.
right.
It doesn't matter what character it is, and that definitely it distracts because you don't quite know what to focus on all the time with the dialogue. And I think that's why, because the plot isn't that crazy to follow, but because nothing is said with like importance, or like there's no moments where you're hearing them say dialogue and you're focusing on that dialogue, you're not catching what's going on.
That's a good point.
You know, because it's not like, it's not a complex, hard to understand movie.
First of all, I've actually read 1,000 reviews of this movie, and I remember early on someone saying, "Turn the sound off, and it's a good movie." And I'm like, that's a pretty harsh, statement, but it's kind of true. Like the dialogue's the worst thing about the movie. The visuals are good in a way. This movie did sort of innovate a lot of, like, Jurassic Park introduced a lot of the CGI that we have now, but this movie really was a combination of live action and CGI. Mm-hmm. Like, it was almost an animated movie. It was like 50-50, right?
Right.
In theaters, Yoda was a puppet.
Yes.
And then they changed it to CGI in the Blu-ray or the DVD, one of them.
We watched the Blu-ray, didn't we?
Yes, yeah. I believe so.
So it was changed like a couple years later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it was around 2005 when Revenge of the Sith came out.
Yeah.
Like, or maybe even Attack of the Clones, when they developed the CG Yoda for that one. They ended up going back and then in one of the re-releases. But the original DVD even does not have... It has the puppet Yoda.
Okay.
But it does look bizarre. To be honest, I really hate... I love puppet Yoda. I hate Phantom Menace puppet Yoda.
Agreed.
I don't know why.
Because
it's awful.
No, I know. And it's like too much white hair, even though he's younger.
And he's like dark green. Like,
right.
It just looks
but also
not
rushed,
like
but just,
Yoda.
But that's the thing, is Frank Oz in the Empire Strikes Back did an incredible job of whatever, I don't know what the art is called. So
deliberate.
Yeah.
Like articulation.
Yeah.
But
it still looks like a good puppet.
Yes. And you feel emotion for it, right? Yep. Right? But in the Phantom Menace theatrical, when they had the puppet again, it's like, okay, ready? Take one. Perfect. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
What? Let's do another one, George, right?
That's a pretty good microcosm for the entire film.
Right.
This is just take one after take one after take one.
Yes. And draft one.
Yeah.
There's no like A New Hope was written and rewritten so many times, and that's why it's awesome.
I think too, George had a lot of like barriers to go through. He had a lot of like things standing in his way, a lot of budget cuts, lot of like effects that he couldn't get done that he wanted to do. He had like the studio kind of standing in his way, where this just feels like George Lucas's dream. Like it's like he just went wild with it, and nobody told him no. Like
for good or ill,
yeah. He had no barrier or anybody holding him back to kind of like fight against him.
In a little bit.
Yeah.
The thing is I mean, and this is why after 9 times of watching it, I did start to appreciate it, because I started to appreciate the energy and the imagination of, like, let's be clear, I love the original trilogy, but the Return of the Jedi is the weak sister of the three, and there's a tiredness to Return of the Jedi that I think this one does not have. This one has an energy and a rejuvenation and a lot of imagination, but in a movie where you have, like, for example, what's Jar Jar's city called, the underwater city?
Just the Gungan city. I don't think that there's
like
a name.
That's a great idea. The music, the beautiful music, flying down, the army of droids, whatever, the donut Death Star, all great ideas. But then at the same time, he's completely half-assed with a lot of his directing. Like, okay, they shoot the what's that called? The when they shoot the like the Batman line that goes up, what's that called?
Oh yeah, the grappling hook.
They shoot it up, and
the ascension guns, I think is what they call them.
And then they fly up, and then they break through the window. But if I want to feel the visceral feeling of smashing through a window, you put the camera right here and you smash, and then they come in and they're looking around the corner to see what the danger is. But in this movie, let's put the camera 100 feet away. Okay, right? And it's like they come through and just
and they practically like just sneak in.
Right,
and
right.
And again, that was my first thought seeing that as well too. I'm like, why the fuck is the camera so far back?
Yes.
I don't know how they could have done it any differently.
Yeah, George, I mean,
like when you see them scaling the side of the building, and now they're all standing on a window ledge that's 6 inches wide, but they don't seem to be at all worried about this. They're just
yeah.
standing there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very self-assured.
They should be scared. They should be like, "Oh my God, we're gonna die."
But I mean, it's
because
they're not really there.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're standing
yes.
on just a blue ground.
Yes.
There's no
Yeah.
blue ledge. They're standing on a blue ground. So you don't even see them like feeling that balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in the context of that scene, there's really no way that they can break through that window dramatically without falling backwards. I don't think that there was any way for them to show it.
Well, I think they could have. I think they have to start from the bottom of writing it differently, staging it differently, building the set differently. But it's like it's almost like every step of the way was done slightly wrong.
Yeah.
And that resulted in sabotaging the whole movie. And I felt like when I walked out of, like, okay, here's the thing, Ian. You said you convinced yourself it was good.
No, I didn't. I was trying to convince
Oh, you
myself.
tried
it
to
was good,
convince-
but
okay.
by the time I got home, I was like,
I
what the hell
didn't.
did I
Okay.
watch?
Like, I saw the film with John Morgan and some other friends, and I remember, and my brother, and I remember watching the film and just being like the whole, I think I told you this. Remember when Jar Jar Binks leaps up into the air? He goes, and is like, blah, 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 and he jumps into the swamp. That was the point where for the rest of the movie, every time Jar Jar Binks was on screen, I put my hand up to block him. I'm like, this guy is so annoying. And when they're sitting at the table talking about the Jedi or whatever, and they're having a serious conversation, and he sticks his tongue out, and I'm like,
And
okay,
Qui-Gon grabs it.
yeah. And I'm thinking Liam Neeson is annoyed. Ewan McGregor is annoyed. Like, they know that this character is an idiot. And I'm just sitting here going, how can this be this bad? And as the movie's going on, I kept feeling like, oh, now the movie's going to begin. Now the good stuff's going to begin. When the pod race started, I thought, now it's going to get good. And then I remember at the point where after the whole movie's almost done and Yoda is like in like the sun is going down and Yoda's like, oh, train him you will or whatever. I'm like, oh, now here we go. Now the movie's going to start. And then the credits rolled. And I'm like, what the hell? That's the movie. And I remember the credits rolled. I'm like, oh my God, that's the movie. Again, biggest disappointment of my life.
And I gotta say, with Jar Jar, again, one of those things where I was forewarned at how annoying he was. To be honest, I kind of always approach that with a bit of skepticism. I'm like, okay, how annoying can one character really be? Well, little did I know.
Yes.
My stomach turned.
Yes.
Every time that fucker walked on screen.
Yes, exactly.
Like I like it's, and again, it's funny. I can't even say again. I wasn't warned, or I wasn't like given an option to be prepared. I just did not think it was that possible for one character to be the source of such irritation, because he would show up in the middle of something kind of going on.
Right, important.
And I would just be like, Jesus fucking Christ. And again, it ties back to what you had said earlier about how, and this was a vibe I was getting, that this movie was being made by a guy that didn't have anyone to say no.
Right.
Where it was just like, yeah, sure, keep going. No,
Sounds like a great idea, George.
Yeah, no. You know, the kids will want to laugh. The kids will want to laugh when they see Jar Jar in the scene. So yeah, don't write them out. This first draft is fine. Yeah. Oh my God, I was getting that same like less of a put up my hand, but and just kind of just healing over, and rubbing your temples.
Right.
I love Jar Jar Binks.
Is that a joke or?
No. Well, I saw this movie when I was 4.
Wait, are you serious? You love Jar Jar Binks? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I
it's
mean,
like
there's always
it's
one.
Like, it's like when you have an imaginary friend. It's like you buy it, but nobody else does. That's kind of how it feels, because I get it. I get how insane it sounds that I like Jar Jar Binks.
It does. I'm still not sure if you're joking.
But
or
I
not.
do. I don't know why. It's the nostalgia of it. I know he's bad. I know he sucks.
Counterpoint: imaginary friends generally aren't everyone else's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I don't know. I've always had a soft spot for Jar Jar Binks. I will say, watching it this time with like the crowd, I did kind of feel the pain of how awful and annoying he was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of annoying, okay, here's the thing. Again,
He was the key to everything.
what's that?
He was the key
Let's
to
talk
everything.
about that's a whole other thing. But I just want to say one thing. This movie existed kind of before the internet. Well, before social media, right?
Yeah.
And I swear to God, when I walked out of the film, me and my friends were like, "Oh, Jake Lloyd was great. Great actor, great character. We loved him."
Really?
And then the social media Phantom Menace pounced on him. And, you know, if Ahmed Best was the number one target, Jake Lloyd was
Jake
number
Lloyd.
2. We loved him. We thought he was a great actor, and I still do. I have no issue with his performance at all.
Well,
Nothing that was bad about him was his fault. It was all Lucas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. He wasn't worse than anybody else in the movie.
Right.
Even Ewan McGregor
Great
kind
actor.
of sucked ass in this
He
movie.
was
Like,
great, yeah.
like nobody did a good
Ewan
job in
McGregor
this movie.
didn't do anything in this movie.
Right.
He just sat around on a spaceship.
Yeah.
Occasionally, he talked to
No-
Qui-Gon with a communicator.
Yeah, did get platonic goo eyes at Qui-Gon. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Like,
nobody
even when his
nobody-
mentor was murdered in front of him, it didn't seem like he cared all that much.
No, he's
Neither did we. Neither did we. Because even though I've seen A New Hope 1,000 times, every time Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan dies,
It's
I get
heartbreaking.
I get a tear every single time. But this movie, I never felt anything for Qui-Gon. And Liam Neeson's a great actor.
Mhm.
He is a great actor, but the way he's written the character, don't give a shit.
Yeah,
you know?
there's not a character that actually feels like a character. They do feel like an action figure. Every single person in this movie, even really down to how they're acting. Like, you can see George like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, they're just saying the lines in his head, and then they're moving on because we need to have a spaceship shoot another spaceship.
But there is one exception. There is one great actor, and I'm sure, Champion, you'll agree with this. And that's Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine.
Yeah.
Great actor, great character. He comes in,
You're right.
2/3 of the way through?
Yep.
And he steals the show. And it's, again, you're watching the movie going, okay, Liam Neeson somehow is sabotaged by George Lucas. Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, all these great actors. And then Ian McDiarmid comes in and he's like, no, I'm better than
But even then, he didn't really have enough. He didn't have enough to do to salvage anything.
I'm just saying his acting was excellent.
He's the best part in all three of the prequel movies.
Yeah.
100%. Like, every single scene he's in is the best scene of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, in this movie, when he's like talking in Padme's ear, getting her to do the vote of no confidence, like, that is the best
Lucifer.
like film moment in, like, you know what I mean? Like, forget the lightsaber fights, like, the story wise, it's so good.
Mm-hmm.
And just how he like backs her into a corner and like tricks her into doing that is fantastic, and really does feel like a real moment in the movie out of all this kind of like weird CGI mess.
You have to wonder if that's how he was written, or if he took what he was given and he spun it around.
I wouldn't be surprised, because he's like a classically trained actor. He did like theater for a really long time. Like, I really think he's fantastic. In again, to Revenge of the Sith, like, this is a whole nother topic, but like the fish opera is like the best.
Oh, it's the best scene
in the movie.
Yep.
You know, it's like he steals any shot, any scene he's in, he steals it. So
every time he's on screen,
you're
I feel like it's
right
now
about
is a different right. Is George Lucas still writing this?
Right.
Is someone else? Is he writing his own dialogue?
No, he's
That's
great.
how good it is. I agree.
Yeah.
But you know, you pointed out one thing when you said that it felt like Lucas was kind of like feeding them their dialogue. Okay, this is, again, I've seen this movie 1,000 times. Did it not seem like Jake Lloyd was a mini version of George Lucas? And whenever he said his dialogue, he kind of had like a little George Lucas little voice. Did you notice that? I'm like, oh my god, he probably, like, George Lucas probably fed him all of his lines, and Jake Lloyd, this little kid, is like, well, I guess I'll have to say it like George.
Yeah, right down to the intonation.
Yeah,
and the cadence
exactly.
and-
Right, and I'm torn as to, like, because when it comes to directing kids, whether it's in like theater or in a movie, some directors have a really great way of doing that. Others just don't. Like, an example for like the reason why Bram Stoker's Dracula, Keanu Reeves, even though he's not a kid, was so crap with his accent. Francis Ford Coppola said, well, listen, he's a really good kid. He was young. I felt bad telling him. So with this, looking at Jake Lloyd, I'm like, did George just like kind of just be like, I don't want to hurt the kid's feelings and tell him to do that take again. So I'll just, he's cute. So just let him go.
That could be it. It could be it.
We suffer for this because we're there and like, okay, well, we're stuck with this kid for the entire movie.
You know, I'm not sure he cared, because he didn't say that to anybody else that wasn't a kid.
That's true.
You know, like,
I
don't
Neeson,
know.
He didn't
like,
say it to Ewan McGregor.
Yeah,
Natalie Portman,
like,
you're right.
I don't think that George Lucas is a good director. I think he's he's great at world building.
Oh yeah,
and he's
no
great
doubt,
at,
no doubt.
He's not great at like, I don't want to say scripts, because he's not fantastic at dialogue, but like
story, like the basic plot.
Yeah. It's unbelievable what he's come up with. Even just down to like imagining the script and like knowing that he could pull all of this off in, you know, the mid 70s, like pulling all of that off is, you know, how he had the foresight for any of this is like crazy. Even down to like keeping the merchandise rights. It's like, oh yeah, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like,
no, he's
like he's
even if you don't think he's a good director, he's a genius he transformed the industry.
Yeah,
and it's partly because he basically had this idea of, I'm going to make a good version of Flash Gordon, and he didn't let anyone stop him. He created Skywalker Sound. He created ILM. He creted what became
THX,
Pixar.
Yeah.
He basically just recreated the industry in his own image in a way. Now, unfortunately, there's a downside to that, but the actual movies he did in the originals were very entertaining and well done. So you got to admire him for that. Unfortunately, as we've said, he didn't have anyone to tell him no in this film. So I think that's the downfall.
He was definitely a genius when it comes to the technical aspect of things. And he was definitely a genius when it comes to reinventing the way films are made. But I think that he should have stayed a little bit further removed from the actual
filmmaking.
The filmmaking.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, okay, this is what I said in 99. I mean, when I saw the trailer and the credits were like written and directed by George Lucas, I was like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And you're sitting here going, okay, by the way, I have to point out, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and On, all those films are independent films. They're funded out of George Lucas's pocket because he's a billionaire, right? They're independent films. He could have hired, who's the best novelist in the world? Okay, I'm going to pay him. I'm going to pay him more money than he's ever made in his life. Who's the best cinematographer? I'm going to pay him. Who's the best whatever?
Yeah.
But he didn't. He wrote it himself. He directed himself. And there's an exact quote in that making of documentary. I think cinematography is important, but I'm not going to pay you $1 million to take a picture. Why not? Pay $1 million and get the best cinematographer.
Right.
Does he know what movies are?
Exactly.
And because even like when it comes to the idea of world building, even something like American Graffiti, to be honest, I love American Graffiti, but the best part of that movie is not the dialogue, not necessarily how it's written. It's those scenes where everyone's cruising around and it's like, oh, I feel like I'm in the early 60s. This is awesome. So again, even going back, because that was his like first big picture, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Even pre-Star Wars, even though it's not the same genre as that, it's again, even early on, you get to see that as well too. So again, when it comes to that blows my mind. Oh, I'm not going to pay you $1 million to take a picture. That's why it's a movie and not a book. Or
I think it could have all been saved with a director that wasn't him. Even the dialogue could have been saved.
Fixed.
I think.
Right.
I mean, even down to like, in Empire, Irvin Kershner was the director, and George wrote the scene of Han and Leia in the I love you too. And I remember that some behind the scenes footage, they were talking, they were like, they did take after take after take. And then they were just like, wing it. Just say how you feel in the moment. And then Harrison Ford ad-libs that I know. And they're like, cut it. That's it. You know, like, it's he knew in that moment that this I love you is not working. It's not believable, right? And he kept going take after take. And there was no take after take.
You have to trust the people around you.
Yeah.
Right? George Lucas is surrounded by professionals who know their craft. But if he's going to sit there and micromanage everything, this is going to be the result.
That's the point. And by the way, I just have to give credit. Lee Brackett wrote the outline. Lawrence Kasdan wrote Empire.
You're right.
Lucas wrote the outline, but the dialogue was. But you're right though. And I've read. There's a book all about the making of Empire. Even like the scene where Boba Fett comes out and Han Solo is like, "What's going on, buddy?" Like they sat there and went, "Okay." He comes out and I say, "What's going on, pal?" No, "What's going on, buddy?" And I'm not saying you have to do that with every scene in a movie, but if you know the dialogue is not coming to life, you kind of have to just let the actors bring it to life, right? And that's what I mean. I'm not saying actors need to be writers, but they need to at least feel like what they're saying is believable, right?
And they need to understand their own character.
Right.
They need to understand if what they're saying makes sense for them. They have to understand how to move, how to act, everything. They have to become who they're pretending to be.
And the thing is, like Mr. Plinkett has pointed out, okay, he asked a bunch of people, describe Han Solo. Okay, they can all do it. Now describe Qui-Gon Jinn, and no one can do it.
Oh, that's such a good part.
It's a brilliant
have you seen
observation.
The Mr. Plinkett,
Of course I have.
Yeah, of course, everyone.
This is a really good omen for joining this podcast.
Yeah.
So yes, I've come to the right place.
Yes,
this is great.
100%. And here's the thing: is that in this movie, it's like we just mentioned a few minutes ago. Yeah, Lucas can come up with a plot, but you can't just have characters like say the dialogue for the plot. They have to have characters, and they have to have different motivations and different like attitudes. And like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are interchangeable, and the Queen is maybe a little bit different, but not much. And most of the characters are interchangeable, right? They're just spouting things that will move the plot forward.
They're just reading the lines.
Yeah, they're just reading the lines. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
And sometimes they don't even do that. Like the two guys that are kind of trying to like cavort around Naboo. Half of their scenes, which are like 5 minutes longer, insert like suspicious accent here. Oh no, what do we do?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, the scene was 2 seconds long. I mean, come on, no, we couldn't have left this on the editing room floor. Like, really?
And I feel like there's other moments where the editing, it feels so weirdly rushed,
right,
and strange. Like the Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's like Jedi run.
Oh my god!
Oh, at the very.
Right?
Oh, again, yeah. That's like, was that written? Was it?
I feel like it
done
had
in editing.
To have been done in editing because it was like, oh, it's taking too long. It's like, okay, cut around it or something. And then,
oh boy,
when there's a moment where they're all on Tatooine, and then the whole gang is like walking across the scene, and R2's kind of like dragging behind, right? And there's a wipe that happens to go to the next scene, and after everybody's out of frame, R2 is there, so they just speed it up so R2 is out faster. So the wipe happens still behind him the whole time. They just like cut and then sped up.
So it's like the wipe is pushing him across the frame.
Yeah, it's so strange. Like
Whoa.
like just have a slow moment where I love R2D2. Why wouldn't I want to see him like just like, or if it's that much of a thing, cut it. Like, I don't know. It just, there's moments like that.
That's a good point. And there's another one. There's a couple more that drive me crazy. And one of them is they're walking back to the ship, and then it cuts away to something, and it cuts back, and they're running. Qui-Gon and Anakin are running. And I'm like, why are they running? And then all of a sudden, what's his name? Darth Maul flies in, and then Qui-Gon and him just start fighting right away. Now, first of all, back up. If this is supposed to be the main bad guy, you want to build it up. He lands. They look at each other. Oh, maybe say some lines of dialogue, right? But if you weren't too lazy to write it, they'd have some lines of dialogue of intimidation and insults and threats.
What are you talking about? You don't remember Darth Maul's famous line?
One line
in the movie?
One line.
At last, we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last, we will have revenge.
Done. And it was overdubbed. It wasn't even the actor.
Right.
Yeah.
Really?
No, it was overdubbed.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But I gotta say though that apparently there's a cut scene in there of why they're running. But when you watch the movie, it's so awkward. And there's a lot of moments like in the movie. And you talked about the making of.
Yeah.
So I've watched the making of for this film and the other prequels more than any other making of than anything. And one of the reasons I like it is because sometimes because I've done my own films and I can feel myself falling into the dark side. Like, oh no, I don't want to be lazy like George Lucas. and one of the things he does is like he writes. It's almost like he writes in post-production. It's like he writes it, then he films it, then he realizes it's shit. And then he goes, oh my God, I got to fix it in post. Yeah, you can fix like, the bag was here, now it's here. You can fix that. You can't fix like, oh my God, the whole second act doesn't work at all. How am I going to fix this? You know what I mean? Like it's
Mike,
ridiculous.
I've been on set with you. I've heard you say faster and more intense.
Yeah, exactly.
And you bring up the second act specifically, because for me that first act had this almost like wonder of like, oh my god, they like put this out and people lined up around the block.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the podcast, the podcast, the pod race,
Well, yeah. Because in general, like the again that second act,
sure,
where, like,
Tatooine,
again, where you're like, it needed someone to yell faster, more intense, because I'm there and I'm like that like initial rush and wonder wore off, and I'm just like, oh, this is starting to feel kind of like an active hostage situation.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's funny because, again, the 9th time I watched it, when I got to when they went to Coruscant, I started to feel like, oh my God, this is like a different movie.
Yep.
It's actually interesting. Oh yeah, by the way, I got to point out something. Lucas criticized the Disney films. Well, and one of the things he said is that when he made the prequels, he specifically tried to make them different. Each one of them was different. So in Phantom Menace, it's like underwater city and grassy thing and Coruscant. Then in Attack of the Clones, you have like bug planet and clone planet and something else. And then in Sith, you have volcano planet and something. But in the Disney films, have we seen anything really new? Not really.
Wait, really? You think so? They have a whole. That's so interesting because I feel the opposite.
Okay, what have we seen new in the Disney films? Not to say I don't like them.
The Last Jedi, there's like a whole scene where they're like on a salt planet, and every step is like
the red.
Okay,
I
but
think it's so interesting.
Wait, that's Hoth with red under their feet. That's it. That's it.
I guess but it's
not snow.
It's not snow. It's salt.
But it looks like it's visually the same, and they have the walkers.
But the guy tastes it and he says it's salt. That's how.
I don't know.
Okay, but visually it's the exact same. Ian, come on.
I know, I'm on your side.
Okay.
But also, I don't think it matters.
It's not salt. It's sugar. It's a sugar planet.
I don't think it matters. It's laundry detergent. It doesn't matter what the planet looks like, though. It doesn't matter where the locale is. I want to have a story. With some characters that like this whole movie. I don't know what character I'm supposed to be following. Right?
I definitely agree. And the thing is too, there are places in this movie that have a really interesting setting, but nothing important happens or even exciting usually happens there. Like they go down into the Gungan village. It's like, whoa, this place is amazing.
I know.
Oh my God.
And then
it's garbage.
Then where do we have like the final battle at the end? We have it on the Windows XP.
Yes,
background.
I know. It's the worst. I know. You're right.
We've just been walking
at least have it in the city.
Forest, right? And no. We never ever do we ever cut to just open field on Naboo. There's always something exciting. It's a huge cliff with a city on the top and a waterfall. We're walking through like a beautiful jungle.
Right.
No.
Let's have the battle over there instead. You're right. I know, you're right.
But the technology of the day
strange.
probably wasn't advanced enough to composite all of these 10 million robots in like a treed area.
Sure, but
you probably had to have a wide open.
Technology wasn't there in 1977, and they still did it.
Right. I'm with you, Josh. I think
don't
they could
know.
have figured it a way. And you know what?
Or don't have it.
Or don't have it. Or do something
You know,
different. Like I think you're right. It's like when they're swimming down to the city, and this beautiful music by John Williams is like, oh, this is great. And then they go into the city. And then you just have a bunch of extras in suits walking around. And what are they doing? Nothing. Mm-hmm. They're just walking around. Like, at least if they were, like, these guys were partying and dancing. Mm-hmm. And these guys were making food. And these guys were, doing something. But they're just, like, extras just walking around. And one more thing I got to say. In A New Hope, the original, when they were walking through... what's the Anchorhead? What's the city called? Not
Mos Eisley.
Mos Eisley. Mos Eisley. It's like it feels like it's like a real city. In this movie, when they're walking through the city, it feels like a bunch of guys in masks walking by. And I can feel the artificial director going, okay, now you walk here and you walk here. But in the original, it felt real.
Yeah, because that's something that I kind of was getting as well in that. Yeah, those extras, especially in the pod race scene.
Yeah.
These people seem really, I don't want to say bored, but they feel like George is just like somebody who's like a first-year film student, really needs people in the background, and is like, hey, like Uncle Bill,
yes,
like
100%.
cousin Ian, can can you please? You know what? I'll get you. I'll get Tim Hortons, and we'll be like just hang out, and they'll like just look excited.
Yes,
that's what. And again,
that's what I got too.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a like. To me, at first, I'm like, man, this is a really minor gripe. But I'm like, no, when there are several shots of extras reacting to Anakin, like having this triumphant race.
They're terrible.
And they're like, wow,
yes,
great.
Because you know what it was? Lucas had the actors for an hour, and he said, okay, now look surprised, and done. Okay, now look happy. Done. And he just got all the takes, and by the way, they're all one angle. Like, you know the shot of Warwick Davis? Is it Warwick Davis?
Yeah, I saw his little cameo.
Yeah. One angle for all of his shots. So you know that he had the one set up because he was too lazy. And he's like, okay, now be happy, now be sad, now be surprised. Okay, you're done. Bye, go home. That was it.
And it's funny, too, because a lot of it coming down to like, oh, Lucas didn't have anyone to say no. He didn't really have a limit, which leads me to kind of be like, it's like, George, you had all the time in the world. You could have taken 5 years to film this movie. You're telling me you didn't have time to have a like, you know, we'll do that take one more time. Felt like it was just like, okay, we got it out.
Yeah,
like, blows my mind.
Also, okay, this also reminds me, I think it was, I don't know who it was that mentioned like the trope at the beginning of the movie. Like one of the first lines was just a bad trope. There's a few more. There's one point where Padme is shooting, and she goes, "We don't have time for this." But it's so like flat that like, oh, well, you're not in any danger. Mm-hmm. So you're right.
Why don't you have time?
Why don't you have time? Yeah. Then another part. Oh, I think it's when. Oh, it's when they get surrounded, and the droids pull guns on them, and they're like, and then they surrender, and they're like, okay, they've won this round.
Yeah.
No, they haven't won this round. They're gonna kill you because in a real movie about a real war, you're gonna get lined up and shot against the wall, and that should have been like when you watch A New Hope. You really feel like when they go into the detention center, whatever it's called, and they rescue the princess, they could get killed at any moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thrill, right?
Right. It's not like it has to be like the Battle of Algiers or something, but at least, again, it can't be like, oh, the occupation army has come by and found us. Whoops.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, isn't this a bummer?
Yeah.
Like, no, there's no gravitas to when they're in that moment. There should be that, like, at least somewhat palpable, like, ooh, this might be it.
Like, we're in danger.
But because George was like, they're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
They're gonna be okay. We don't want to scare the kids.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. There's a little plinket for you.
And you know what's, by the way, one thing, he keeps saying it's a kid's movie. Okay, fine, George, I'll accept it's a kid's movie. But at least A New Hope and Empire and a little bit of Jedi, you could enjoy it as an adult. And you could feel that threat of danger. And there's a real story there.
A kid's movie doesn't mean that it's dumb.
Right.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And that is everything that's wrong with this movie. It's also why, as a kid, I loved Jar Jar. It's because George knew that was going to be great for kids, but and he had this vision in his mind. All of these places look beautiful. All of these things are really great, but it's not a cohesive story at the end of the day. Like, it just doesn't work, right? So while Jar Jar is awful, and I don't blame anybody for hating him, it works. These small things and moments work for what he intended at times. You know what I mean? Like, it has this weird charm to it. Well, and that's why I do love this movie.
Yeah, just like I love it too, Ian. No, but it's like there are, like, for example, like the pod race, no gravitas, because what happens if he loses? Oh, he'll just keep being a slave. No, it should be if you lose the race, you're dead. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. But the idea of the pod, like of the, what are they called? The pods?
Pod racers?
The pod racers. Those are cool. Because they're like the Star Wars version of a hot rod. That's a cool idea, right? Yeah, there's a lot of cool ideas.
That Anakin's Anakin's pod racer sounded exactly like an F1 car.
Okay.
But I think, you know what's funny is my father's really good at identifying engines. Mm-hmm. When we watched the opening of Attack of the Clones, like the plane that flies in, he knew what plane it was.
Oh, really?
I think that's purely intentional. I think it's a callback to Hollywood and old Hollywood stuff. I think. I don't know, though.
Maybe.
See, for me, what kind of... Now, again, I love the pod racing scene. It was one of the few scenes where I was like, I feel this is going long, but I'm glad because I'm finally engaged, save for the extras. But then certain little things, like when he's hanging out with the other kids before the pod race, and there's like a stock children laughing sound effect.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't make fun of Kitster's voice.
I know.
Exactly. I'm like,
Come
this
on
is
now.
what we would hear on like Saturday morning like cartoons.
I know.
And even then, it would be like, what? Again, this director that had this infinite. Like, he could have said, I'm sure, any budget in the world, made any kind of creative call that he could, took as much time to do that. And then you have things like that, where, again, if you were a first-year film student, it would have been like, okay, you're first year, but, like, maybe next time, like, I don't know, dig a little deeper into the sound library.
Exactly.
Or
I
maybe
agree.
don't even have kids at all.
Please.
Well,
Right?
that's a whole other ball of wax.
You don't need kids in a kids movie to have kids interested in the movie. Case in point, I liked the original Star Wars when I was a kid.
Exactly.
I put myself, when I'm watching this, in the
Luke's.
position of the characters, right? The
Right.
position of the hero. And it doesn't matter if it's significantly older than me.
Well, and that's also why, like, despite the introduction of Robin into Batman, and as well as many other introductions of kids' characters, you're right. We always identify with the hero. It doesn't matter if they're 20, 30, 40. It doesn't matter. But I think the main problem with this film fundamentally is that because you have a child protagonist, you go in thinking, oh, okay, this is a kid's movie. It's about a kid. But it doesn't work because this kid ends up being a freaking dictator that kills half the galaxy. So you're watching the movie going, what am I supposed to feel? Right? Like, okay, it's a kid's movie, so I identify with him, but he's evil, and we only know he's evil because we've seen the other 3 movies. So what am I supposed to feel, and where is this going?
Would you even call Anakin the protagonist?
Well,
I mean,
I don't know.
I don't have an
No, you're
answer.
right.
to
Maybe
that,
there
right?
isn't
point.
one. Maybe there isn't one.
And it's funny, too, because I will say, again, one of the things I was kind of forewarned, although I can't say forewarned because I genuinely thought it was a bit like Anakin virgin birth.
Yeah.
I was like, someone said that, I was like, oh, good one. Can't wait to see what, like, who actually did that.
What's the real one? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I think I turned and I was just like, no.
Well,
No
either
way.
Lucas is criticizing Judeo-Christianity, or he just, I don't know. I mean,
Didn't have a good idea.
didn't have a good
Yeah.
idea. I mean, he did study and emulate Joseph Campbell, so maybe that's why he was trying to emulate older myths. I don't have a problem with that per se. I don't know. I think he kind of developed it later with Revenge of the Sith a little bit. But,
Fair.
But yeah, I don't know. I didn't mind that. What?
Wait till you find out the Padme dies because she loses the will to live.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh boy. So yeah. One more thing I want to say about the kids thing. I think one thing that could have fixed it is if Obi-Wan was also a kid, and we had a Fox and the Hound type plot.
Okay, yeah.
Where 2 kids grow up, and it's okay to have a bad one because you also have a good one, and all the kids can identify with Obi-Wan, and Anakin's the bad one, right? He's the temperamental. Because by the way, there's a deleted scene from this movie where Anakin, after the race, gets made fun of, and he gets into a fist fight with one of the kids, and I'm like, oh my god,
That would have been helpful.
yes, put that in the movie.
He had emotion?
Yeah, had emotion, and he had a character. Can you believe it? Right?
It's really a quite foreign concept after
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
it.
exactly.
But I'll entertain your fantasy that you're indulging me to.
Yeah. Oh boy. So anyway, here's the thing. I've said so much about this movie. I've already reviewed it on the Comic Book Syndicate twice, so I probably said all I could say. Josh, do you have anything else to say about this film?
I don't think that there's any other just really bad movie that I love so much. It's like an oxymoron of a movie. You know what I mean? Like
I hear you.
I love it so much, but I see it for all its flaws, and I kind of like it because it is so flawed. I don't know. I love this movie.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Would I recommend anybody watch it? I don't think so. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, you gotta watch Phantom Menace, but if somebody else loves Phantom Menace, then I feel like there's this weird just bond there. You know what I mean? I don't know. I love this movie. I really do.
That's why you're on Laser Brains.
Right,
Okay, Champion, do you have anything else to say about this film?
I'm just glad that it's done. It's 2 hours, 10 minutes or so of my life that I will never get back. it was just so flat and emotionless and bereft of any sort of, I don't know. It doesn't work for me on any level, except some of the special effects are impressive. The pod race scene, I think, is the pinnacle of this movie. And I also kind of think that, like, I get the sense that the movie was sort of written around the pod race. Like, they started there and they built outwards.
It does kind of.
Could be.
How do we get from somewhere to the pod race and then from the pod race somewhere else?
Most of the practical sets are there. Like, the stands are all like miniatures and stuff like that. It feels real, even when there are like CG pod racers.
Are you
around.
saying you don't love this movie?
I do not love this movie.
Okay.
No. I'm not the biggest Star Wars guy. I love A New Hope. I love Empire Strikes Back. I like Return of the Jedi, most of it. I'm a big fan of Force Awakens.
Yeah, me too.
Everything else.
I'll add Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker and Andor to that. But I will say that I'm almost with you where I love the old Star Wars like more than anyone in the world. But I don't give a shit about most of the spin-offs and sequels and cartoons and books and comics, because what it comes down to is, yes, I love Star Wars, but more so than Star Wars, I love Harrison Ford and Lawrence Kasdan and Irv Kershner and the films. Like, they're great films. The lore is cool, but I'm not going to go out and read all the novels to find out what planet Boba Fett was from. I don't give a shit. That's what it comes down to. And that's why all these spin-offs that we have now, I don't care as much.
I'm going to say one more thing as well about the original Star Wars films. I think that part of what made them great is that they were working with what they found. And they had to be inventive, and they had to they were swimming upstream when they're making these movies.
Good point.
We get to what's this called again?
It's called
the Phantom Menace.
Something like that.
Now all of a sudden George Lucas has all the money in the world, and he has nobody to challenge him. And this is the result. There was no adversity there.
The true Phantom Menace.
Good point.
As a result, I don't think there's much artistry aside from things that look nice, but it's empty calories.
100%. I agree with you. Last word.
Yeah. From my first viewing, the pod race and Duel of Fates like really hold this up more than it has to, and that's kind of sad. Because, again, there's so much. This was such a canvas that he could have worked with. And the stuff in between is either, as Ian said, just boring, blank. But I got to say, like, I mean, this is not necessarily the movie's credit or George's credit. That emotionless kind of blah through so much of it was countered just by the experience of the really heightened emotion that it was to watch with people that had seen it before and had this kind of like, oh my God, you've never seen this?
Yes.
Oh my, holy shit, no way. Oh my, we got it. That honestly is a really unique, cool experience that, again, I'll only be able to have this. Am I rushing to watch this again? Fuck no. Oh my God. This may sound like sacrilege, but I'm sitting here and I'm kind of like looking at the palette, looking at the time this came out. I'm like, I could throw on Fifth Element when I go home.
That's a whole other story. Another movie to me with great visuals and not a great story, but that's all. That's another episode.
For sure. Yeah. For sure. But again, because I feel like if this one was way tighter, because Fifth Element by no means perfect at all. Sure. But if Phantom Menace was tighter and just had a little bit of fat shaved off, and again, maybe one or two more takes with their characters, it could have been. It could have
refilmed the whole movie. Yeah.
Right. It could have been something closer to that.
Start from scratch and we got something.
Where I think I could have gotten more of an experience that you did, where it was like, you know what, I love it because there's these certain things where I'm like, just they charm you. I didn't get that charm to that extent, but I mean, this was a really great chance to, have that first experience with a group of people.
That's good to know, because guess what? Every week at Meteor, we have this experience with people who have not seen movies, people from other countries who have never even heard of some of these movies, right? And they see them for the first time. So every other week, we do an episode of Tape Crusaders, and in between, sometimes we're going to do an episode of our new podcast, Laser Brains. So we'll be doing mostly science fiction and fantasy and other genres on that. But be sure to check us out every week. Different movie every week here at Meteor, courtesy of Champ Ian. Popcorn Alcohol? Are we allowed to advertise for alcohol in here? I don't think so. We can't mention that. No. So forget that. We don't have alcohol.
We don't know. We have to. If you're 19 and over,
yes, then you can.
Mike
drink.
said alcohol. If you're 19, if you're 18 and under, I don't know what he said.
Something.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Dr. Pepper.
There you go, Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper every week. So there you go. Laser Brains. Join us again soon, and that's it. See you next time.